Hello and welcome, I'm Tafarag Damoum. An expert in Earth observation and remote sensing, she has covered the academia and industry for many years. My guest, Dr. Kate Fickas, was able to visit universities and held discussions with government officials to try to look into how her expertise could be replicated here. A very warm welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Remote sensing sounds quite remote. In many cases it is.
That's right. So when you think of remote, sometimes you think of space. And you think of the stars, the moon, the planets above, but I use the term remote to actually point things down at Earth to monitor what's going on the ground from up in space remotely. So there's a lot of different reasons why we want to use remotely sensed data. We can see the entire planet, we can go to remote places, and more importantly, we can get a lot of different data types really quickly from space.
And sourcing data quite literally, in real time, right?
That's right. We can go from real time, meaning that we can task a satellite now with the same ease we could call a taxi or call an Uber on our cell phone. Some satellites orbit the Earth very consistently, and then there are the satellites that in 18 minutes I could task a satellite. It could take a picture of the building we're sitting in here today, and we would have that information right away if we needed it.
So who needs this information? I know it's not like specific, sector specific, right?
It's not. For a long time it was. Really, it's only been in the past 5 to 10 years that it's opened up in terms of different sectors. It was really research-based, a lot of computer science before, but now biologists, environmental conservation, energy sector for understanding the best place to build a solar farm, monitoring disaster relief, so understanding the flood extent or a wildfire extent. All of those things can be seen from space, and they can help us tell who needs help where the best places to put different resources are, and really tell a holistic story that uses geography to make decisions.
So you've been in the business for how many years now?
About 10, about a decade, yeah. So I come from research and academia, and I've recently turned to being able to take the research that I've done with remote sensing and satellites and start to help, as you mentioned, go across different sectors and allow people to ask the question, what if? What if I could use satellites for this? What if I could use satellites for that? And really right now we're in an exciting time where the possibilities are endless.
So you're also involved in developing those products? Can you tell me about these, for example, GIS products and so on?
Yeah, absolutely. So the field of geography has really developed over the past maybe 5 to 6 decades. So we went from maybe making maps with pens and papers out in the field to being able to create maps on computers. And then we could share those maps across organizations. And it went from just making maps to then being able to ask questions, scientific questions about the data. And so the geographic approach to GIS, or Geographic Information Systems, is able to incorporate things like economic considerations, societal considerations, environmental, all through adding data that tells the story of where. And remote sensing is a great way to be the foundation of asking those questions and seeing where we can ask and be curious about different parts of our Earth. So
about the products that you're developing at ESRI, that's one of the big companies in the United States involved in this project, right?
It is, yeah. So my job is to be able to put puzzle pieces together using different software products and different data types in different industries to be able to solve new and novel problems. So like I mentioned, for a long time, remote sensing, or sometimes it's called Earth observation, was really gatekept by people who had fancy lab equipment or a lot of computing power. But now, like I mentioned, you could have satellite imagery on your phone. And so my job is to be able to be the bridge connecting questions from something like a construction site monitoring, using remote sensing, drones, cell phone camera, any type of image you can think of, we can put it on a map.
Are there any ethical standards here?
Excellent question. One of the things that we worry about is something called helicopter science, where someone in the United States, for example, could be doing analysis in a different country without ever having necessarily talking to the people on the ground who know what's happening best. And if policies and decisions are made without talking to local communities, that may be the wrong decision, and it may not be successful in the end. So that's one consideration. We also have considerations of privacy. our satellite imagery and our drone imagery is getting so well that we could easily detect faces. So being able to keep individuals private, make sure that we're monitoring privacy and keeping that safe is an important component. And we can use a lot of new technology that we've come up with as a global community, like artificial intelligence, to be able to blur faces and that type of thing.
So what other mechanisms would you put in place to, for example, you said you use GIS technologies in for almost everything here. I know a few who've used this here, but these are expats. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Once they used it here, they take it back home.
Exactly.
Nothing is left behind in terms of knowledge transfer.
Absolutely.
Do you think that a serious issue that needs to be?
Yeah, that's a issue that it's one of the reasons why I'm here. So I had the honor of being here as a representative of the U.S. Embassy's speaker program under the space cohort. So that brings experts from around the world into the embassy, and then we try to make connections with local communities and local leaders who might be able to help make some movement in new technologies. So really my goal is to be able to build human capacity. We have all the technological capacity and all those puzzle pieces together. What it really needs is the ability to do trainings, workshops, and bring that technology so that it stays in Ethiopia, for example, and it can help the Ethiopian people as a whole, the natural resources you hold, the species that inhabit the country. So right now, technology is advancing at a very rapid rate in remote sensing, GIS, and artificial intelligence and machine learning. And across the globe, our ability to understand how we're using it and the consequences of what we're using it for has not kept pace with the explosion of technology. So asking questions, being curious, and making sure that we're taking it one step at a time is really important.
And that's what you ran into when you had this conversation with students from 2 or 3 universities here.
That's right. Most of the students I talked to and many of the professors I talked to didn't know that they had this data available to them. So the first step is
that they can easily tap into, they can access?
Absolutely. We have a lot of free data. So for a long time, the most frequently used satellite data was from federal agencies like the U.S.'s NASA or the European Space Agency, the Japanese Space Agency, and a lot of that data is free and open, and it's been collecting data for 50 years. Our Landsat program in the United States, my favorite satellite, I don't like to play favorites, but I'll say that's my favorite satellite. We have time series data back to the 1970s to monitor urbanization and how natural resources have changed. So just making first the awareness that data is available, and then connecting to professors, students, hopeful students with the curiosity that they have and the questions they have is really important. I had even a high school student come up to me and ask an absolutely brilliant and insightful question that many of my colleagues have not even asked about how we monitor drought. And I asked her how she came up with that question, and she said she saw it outside her window. She's been reading about drought and the difference between the drought season and flood season, and how that affects the people and the landscape. And it's the ability to allow users like her and students like her to really ask those questions, get curious, use the science of where, use satellite imagery, geography to ask those questions, and then hopefully bring some solutions. That's what's most important.
This is not just about infrastructure, correct? Is that what you say?
It's not just about the data infrastructure or the software infrastructure. It's also about the human infrastructure to be able to implement these changes, bring this type of science into the everyday workforce. In the United States and other countries, we see that GIS experts, and now it's increasing that remote sensing experts are a part of everyday organizations, from commercial companies to state and local government to the federal government. Many of them have a GIS or a remote sensing scientist on staff so that they can monitor assets and, like I said, ask these questions. So being able to bring that into countries like Ethiopia, where investment in technology is starting to explode, it's important that we build that human capacity infrastructure as well.
What do you think are the first steps that need to be taken to address that?
Great question. I think that hopefully one of the...
Because you've been in academia and also
Yeah,
industry.
absolutely. Absolutely. So in reference to academia, often we create scientific analyses, and all they do is go into a journal article without really anything actionable. So my hope in my role here as a state U.S. ambassador or speaker in this industry is to be able to build these bridges so that I can bring some of the technological capacity and the training and the funding into the country so that that's what stays, and that we're not exporting individuals to become experts in this field, and they stay and they help Ethiopia itself.
So you also visited with government institutions like the Ministry of Innovation and so on.
That's right.
What was the conversation like? What are they interested in the first place?
Yeah, I think it's also an exciting time for their office as well. For the state minister, he described space being one of the places that they'd like to explore. And again, space means a lot of different things for different people. And I point things down at Earth from space rather than pointing them out into the stars. But what I emphasize with him is that at this exciting time when a lot of technology investment is coming into the country, and the universities and the governments and commercial entities are investing in technology, we have to make sure that we're creating from the ground up a system of records, a system of systems, so that data can be shared with the public. It can be shared with other organizations, other scientists. So often in every country around the world, data gets collected and analyzed and sits somewhere either in the cloud on a computer or in someone's filing cabinet. And that data does no good to anyone sitting there. So the ability to share it out so that other people can take that data, add it to other data, ask questions, create solutions is really important. So I emphasize to him that if he wants to start collecting data or adding capacity towards collecting new data, that we start with the system of system and have a goal of making that data shareable from the get-go.
You have also created, it's not a movement yet, but you're being gender sensitive, right?
Yeah, so when I started my graduate work in the field of remote sensing, I had come from a field, I was a wildlife biologist before I got into remote sensing. And in that field, I had many different female friends, male friends, people of different color. It was very diverse. And I got into remote sensing, and I was the only woman in my lab, and I traveled around the world at conferences.
Not unusual.
It's not unusual. And it was around the world, there were no women at these conferences, and I kept asking, where are all the women? And I felt somewhat isolated because oftentimes the problems I face maybe weren't relatable to my male colleagues. And then I can only imagine how for example, people of color might feel. I'm a white woman of privilege, but someone who comes from maybe a first-generation family may feel completely isolated. So I, in a moment of loneliness, started a Twitter group called Ladies of Landsat. And we say now that we're gender neutral and satellite agnostic. So you can use any satellite or remote sensing data you want, and any gender you are, you're welcome. And it's that last part, being welcome, that's so important. We have conversations about what's hard about being in academia, what's hard about being a woman, what's hard about being a person of color. Have those conversations out loud so that they're not held in isolation over private lunches for the privileged who get to go to these top-level meetings, and that younger generations of students can know that if they enter into remote sensing or GIS, that they're going to be supported by organizations like Ladies of Landsat and others who have their back, will stand up for them and make them feel safe and included.
Included, but DEI, all this while DEI is being disregarded in the United States on a much larger scale.
It is. Many universities are removing
diversity, inclusion, and so on, yeah.
Yeah, so diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, DEIA is what we talk about a lot. And yes, in many universities, they're taking away our DEIA departments. Many universities are fighting to keep them. But what the administration needs to understand, what the world needs to understand, is that with more diverse perspectives, not just in terms of gender, but across the board, you get more diverse solutions because of more diverse questions and more diverse experiences. So someone who's done field work or grew up in Ethiopia has a very different experience than someone like me who grew up on the west coast of the United States. I don't know the right questions to ask about Ethiopia. I don't know different perspectives that might come from being really curious about using that type of data. So it benefits everyone when we include and increase diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility to as many people who want it. It does no one any good to keep that gate up and barrier to entry for using this type of data.
I'm sure it's going to be a tough fight, particularly more so when big industry leaders have a total disregard for this.
Yes, that's right.
In the U.S.
And it's finding places where support and you have leaders that champion DEIA, not for the sake of diversity. You don't want to just do it for being a token woman or a token person of color. You want to do it because it makes you a better company. It makes you a better university. It makes your research richer. For every person that we have that disregards DEIA, we have someone else supportive. For example, in a lot of scientific journals across the world, if you do research in a specific country, they will not publish your paper anymore unless you've included someone from that country on the ground within that science, so that we can stop the helicopter science and that we know that big organizations are supportive, have the backs of people who may not otherwise be included and are marginalized from science, and then go into other fields, and we're all worse for that chain.
I know you came here to sell an idea in your line of work, your profession. But what are you taking back home?
Excellent question. So often in research and academia, we think in a vacuum. We don't understand what the conditions are like on the ground, what people need, what the different systems in place do to affect potential solutions that we might come up with. So what I'm taking home, first of all, is what a beautiful country Ethiopia is and what a kind people Ethiopians are, and that they're so eager to be able to start to solve problems, but really it has to come from them. And for me, I want to add capacity in terms of support, technology, training. But what I really want to make sure is that I'm including the really smart people here who have a long history and are very proud of their country, and including an Ethiopian spirit in whatever geospatial science, remote sensing science, or geography that we start to build these programs around. So I've been so welcomed by this country, and I'm excited to hopefully partner into the future so that we can help harness the momentum, excitement, and youth that are excited to make some changes here.
Dr. Kate Fickas, thank you very much. It was really a pleasure having you on my show. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor, and it's an honor to be in this country, so I'm so delighted and honored. Thanks.